Royal Commission will have its report whenever it happens. But from your experience of teaching theology and working with the community, what do you think are the key drivers of this attack? Is it radical ideology, online incitement, failure of intelligence, or something else?
Oh, look, I think all of the above. Um, the intelligence failed. In what way it failed, we're not sure yet. Online radicalisation, that's become part of the terrorist scene for some time now. And look, Islamic State is very good. Well, I should say very effective at online radicalisation. Um, in terms of the ideology, and this is the thing that people don't want to address. Um, the reality is that there is a radical extreme ideology out there. It's a religious ideology, and that's what was behind this. Now, this raises a deeper problem with society. In Western societies, especially Australia, we don't talk about religion. It's this great taboo. You don't talk about religion in polite company. Um, but we remain ignorant of religion then. And it means that we can't talk about radical Islam. That's a problem. It also means we can't talk about moderate Islam. And so what I found in my decades of working in the field is that people are afraid to confront radical Islam head on. But because of that, they are incapable of distinguishing radical Islam from moderate Islam. And, and the reality is that the crushing majority of Muslims are not terrorists. They don't support terrorism. They may have political viewpoints, but most Muslims are absolutely appalled by what happened at Bondi. And the reality is that one of the heroes of Bondi was himself a Muslim. But there is a small number, and they are a minority, of radicals, of extremists, who have been radicalised online by hate preachers, and they are motivated by this radical extremism to go out there and kill people. And our failure to deal with that was one of the drivers behind the Bondi massacre. And I've got to say, I've been disappointed, to say the least, with media figures and law enforcement figures who've said this has got nothing to do with religion. Now, I've been hearing this for decades. It's got nothing to do with religion. And I said, well, okay, 9/11, Al-Qaeda, a radical Muslim organisation, Hamas, the Islamic Resistance, Hezbollah, the Party of God, Islamic State, it's in the name. It doesn't represent mainstream Islam. And that's a very important point to make. But it does represent extremist Islam. And we've been too afraid to deal with it, afraid for different reasons. And so that was a key driver in the attack, and it's something that we've been afraid of dealing with and incapable of dealing with because people don't understand it and they fear it. And there's actually there's another side to this. When I talk with people in the Islamic community who are moderates, and they complain privately, of course, they said, because you guys don't deal with the extremists, because you don't understand the extremists, because you won't confront the extremists, we feel powerless because we're unprotected. And if we're critical of the extremists, we wonder, will the government protect us? So I think that we've been living on this heavy dose of political correctness and ignorance for so long that we've been afraid to deal with this wicked ideology that has come and hit us pretty hard. And I'll just say one more thing on that. When I did my counter-terror fellowship in the Middle East, this is some time ago, One of the leaders asked me a question. He said, Matthew, who are the first victims of terrorism in this world, of Islamic terrorism? And some people in the group said, oh, Jews. Others said Christians. And he said, it's fellow Muslims. And this is something when I was talking to someone who'd been very closely involved in Hamas. The thing that had turned this guy against Hamas was seeing the way that Hamas, an extremist Sunni sect, had treated their fellow Muslims. And so perhaps there's a lesson here. I mean, Australia is multicultural. We're a land that believes in the protection of all people. The fact that we cannot protect our Christian, our Jewish, our Sikh community, people of any religion, also means we can't protect moderate Muslims. It's an all-round failure. And this failure was what resulted in the Bondi attack. So, look, I realise that I sound like I'm on a high horse there, but this is a key driver that we have ignored to our great peril.
You talked about all these groups. The Bondi attack has been linked to a call for global intifada. Can you help us understand this concept of intifada, and do you agree with the linkages of intifada to the Bondi attack?
Look, I agree 100%. The terrorist organisations that are inspired or motivated by Islamic extremism generally tie themselves to the Palestinian cause. And that's any number of terrorist groups. Whether they authentically represent the Palestinian people, I would dispute. But look, they claim that. And look, all of these groups are anti-Semitic. They all hate Jewish people. And the way that they legitimise that is by saying they're pro-Palestinian. And so Globalise the Intifada means different things to different people, but it essentially means that any of these extremist groups will claim that Intifada mantle, if you like, to justify their attacks. And perhaps if I could expand on that a little bit, what a lot of people don't realise is that this sort of Intifada, this struggle against Israel, is not just a struggle against Israel as a nation, but it's a struggle against the Jewish people in general. So if you look, for example, at Hamas, the group responsible for October 7 and many, many other atrocities, if you look at the founding covenant of Hamas, and this is easily available on the internet, it refers to the resistance, it refers to the struggle, it refers to their hatred for the Fatah, for the Palestinian Liberation Organization. But when it talks about the Jews, it talks about the day of judgment, which won't come until the Muslims kill all the Jews. You know, they say that on this great day, the stones and the trees will cry out, "O Muslim, O servant of God, there's a Jew behind me, come and kill them." Importantly, not Israelis, but Jews. The aim of Hamas is not just to take over the Holy Land from the river to the sea, it's to kill every Jew on the planet. Let me expand that. On the steps of the Opera House after October 7 and before the full force of the Israeli response, people were chanting. Now, people dispute, gas the Jews or where's the Jews? I think they were saying gas the Jews. I mean, it's a stretch to say it was where's the Jews. But in a way, it doesn't matter because the crowd was not shouting, we hate Israel or where are the Israelis? They were crying, where's or gas the Jews? So this whole intifada thing is a mantle taken on by terrorists who are anti-Semitic, and they use that as a justification for their actions. So, what we saw at Bondi was certainly part of that globalization. That terrorists will claim their solidarity with the Palestinian cause and use that as their justification for their atrocities.
You mentioned about the Opera House and all those protests. How much do you think those climate of protests on Sydney Opera House, on universities, because you work in universities, on social media, at rallies, it has created that environment that if something happens, it's permissible?
Well, look, I'll preface this by saying I'm actually rather proud of my own university at Notre Dame. I'm not just saying that because I want to give my university a shout out, but the leadership there has been um, very, what's the word? They've been keen, they've been sincere in making sure that all students on campus are safe. And at the moment, the safety of Jewish students and staff has been a great concern. So they've been terrific. The sad thing is there are universities in our state and others where Jewish students have not been safe. They've had these encampments, they've had anti-Semitic staff, they've had anti-Semitic students. You had an example at UWA, this was a bit over a year ago, where there was, part of this Palestinian struggle call for boycott, divest, and sanction, at which one of the speakers called for a one-state solution, which is Hamas code for kill the Jews. And someone was caught on video calling for the camps to be reopened, as in the concentration camps. That's created a really horrible atmosphere. You've got Curtin University, where you've had the camps, the tent protests, whatever you want to call them. Staff have felt unsafe, students have felt unsafe. The fact that those were not shut down has created a lot of fear in the Jewish community and fear from people who are just everyday, ordinary Australians. But the failure to shut it down has also emboldened people. The bad actors will look at the universities and say, hey, we've taken an inch, we've been given a mile, and this is the nature of extremism. It has to be more and more extreme. So I think that by allowing these things, there's been a great failure in the community, which has emboldened people to take the next step. And the reality is that, look, universities are always places of protest. Whether it's for the rights of one group or another, whether it's for the environment or this cause or another. And that's part of university life. But those things don't preach hatred. And that's the difference here. That at some university campus, they have allowed rallies, protests, camps that have promoted hatred and a threat to people. And as I've said, if I could put it another way, in the first place, it makes people on campus feel very, very unsafe. But also those who might be, who might have ill intent, look at those and think, well, we've got a license to take it the next step. So universities, I do think they've got to bear some responsibility here. As I've said, Notre Dame has been fantastic. And without exaggerating, I've had Jewish people come up to me and say, isn't it ironic that the campus at which my children feel safest as Jews is a Catholic university? That's great. The tragedy is that they don't feel safe on other campuses.
While all these protests were happening on ground, what do you think the role was played by the foreign media and social media in ramping up these divisions, especially when the media reiterates the number of deaths in Palestine given out by Hamas, because the government is controlled by Hamas there. So how do you see that their role?
Well, absolutely. There's the expression that the first casualty in war is truth, and I think what's come out of Gaza is certainly exemplifies that. Uh, the Hamas Health Ministry figures were taken as gospel truth by many people in the media. Look, to be honest, a lot of people in the media are not very sympathetic to Israel, and so it has suited their agenda to take on those figures. But then that's amplified through social media. So we see some things through traditional media, but look, many people today, I believe 40% of people get their news through social media. Social media doesn't have the same safety mechanism, if you like, or quality control that you're meant to find in traditional media. So you get people who get onto a Facebook page or a website and they're fed information that whips them up into a frenzy. And look, one of the important things about social media is that I understand the algorithms of social media are designed to generate conflict. This was, and perhaps for legal reasons, I won't mention which one, but a very prominent social media network set its algorithms to foster conflict, because conflict builds engagement. Engagement builds advertising revenue. And look, just try that sometime. If you post something positive on social media, you might get a couple of likes. Post something that is angry, something that is hateful, and people will engage immediately. So I'm not saying post stuff that's hateful, but maybe look at what other people post. Or just tell people you disagree and look at the response. So social media is designed, in my opinion, to generate conflict. And when you have a situation such as Israel and Hamas, social media tends to whip that up and aggravate it rather than to seek peaceful solutions. So, look, social media has been absolutely horrible, and there have been foreign influences as well. We see, for example, the action taken against the Iranian embassy when it became clear that the Iranians, the current regime in Iran, God willing, they'll be gone soon, were actively fostering terrorism in Australia. Now I haven't verified these claims, but when people said to me, Matthew, look at the tents at some of these tent protests. How can students afford those? Because they're very, very expensive tents, and they're the same model. And the allegation has been made that there is foreign influence and foreign money behind this. So that's something that I hope a Royal Commission will uncover, is that I think we are aware to an extent of foreign influence and foreign money, but how deep does that run? And that really, look, there are rumours, there are stories, there are theories, and I think they really need to be tested. We know for a fact Iran has tried to and has successfully fostered hatred and crime in this country. The question is, and I raise this as a question or an accusation, what other foreign actors have been involved? Hopefully the Royal Commission will uncover that.
Still on to that, the background for this attack. I came to Australia in 2014. I've counted the number of attacks since then. There have been 11 attacks. Out of those, 9 were IS inspired. And every time we hear the response from the police agencies, they always come back and say it was a lone wolf attack. There's no continued or no support for the attacker or the terrorist from anyone else. The AFP has said in this Bondi terror attack the same thing. They were acting alone, there was no broader support. If that happens every time and there is a continuous attack from the same side, do you think the police agencies or the security agencies are missing something here?
Well, look, the reality is that I think maybe we can throw some light on this by comparing Al Qaeda to Islamic State. The best known attack of Al Qaeda was 9/11, and that was their own people who were well funded, trained for a long time in a very effectively planned attack. Al Qaeda would work by this careful planning, selection of the terrorists, and it was very much their work. Islamic State, in terms of international terrorism, has worked differently. It influences people, it inspires people, and they have been very effective in inspiring lone wolf attacks. So it's the next phase of terrorism, if you like. And look, there were, because I mean, Islamic State emerged out of Al Qaeda. There were differences of opinion within Al Qaeda back when bin Laden was alive. Bin Laden wanted a very carefully managed organization with carefully managed attacks. There were others within the organization who said, look, we should just inspire people, throw the information out there, and let people do whatever they want. And that's what Islamic State has done. And so you've got, I mean, to call it lone wolf, I mean, the Link Cafe siege was lone wolf, inspired by Islamic State. Bondi was lone wolf, inspired by Islamic State. The people are alone in terms of the people, but not by the ideology. And that's the important thing. Ideology is crucial here. When people encounter that ideology, and look, the reality is there are lots of people with access to that. I mean, anyone on a home computer now can access Islamic State material and be radicalized. They may not even know they're reading material from Islamic State. You may have 100 people, 1,000 people who are exposed to the ideology, but maybe only one or two will actually take that step to committing acts of terror. But that's the reality. You only need one or two people to do it. So I think that one of the problems with policing, law enforcement, and the military around the world, so it's not uniquely Australian, is that we have the mentality of criminal organisations and nations and conventional armies and conventional criminals working in particular ways. And that's what our people have been trained for. But contemporary terrorism breaks all of those rules. You know, even it comes down to the motivation for terrorism. It's not motivated by power or money. It's motivated by ideology. It's very different to conventional warfare, where you have armies who work under a general who work in a particular way. Terrorism is something that works very effectively with radicalized individuals. So what we should be doing about that is that this sort of stuff is unfamiliar to many people in law enforcement and in some agencies. I noticed that Israel actually offered their expertise to Australia because Israel, of necessity, is probably the most expert country in the world. And I think we need to be taking advantage of that. You know, I highlighted my friend Major Itai Gill, who looked at Australia and told me something bad is going to happen. and this is what you need to change. And now Israel has offered its help. I think we should accept that, to learn from their experience. And look, the reality is Australia is different to Israel. We have maybe different threats, but they're related. And we need to bring our people up to date. And also, I've got to say, resourced. When I talk to people in law enforcement privately, and they're just marvellous people. And sometimes, well, they're well trained, they're committed. We don't have the resources to do what we should be doing. So we need the expertise, we need the resources, and we need a government with the courage to do that.